Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about marital difficulties, issues between husbands and wives, and unfortunately the increasing incidence and prevalence of divorce in the Muslim community. And I want to talk about this sensitive issue from a different angle, which I feel is often neglected, and that is the angle of mental health, mental well-being, emotional intelligence. So I've been involved in a number of cases where there's unfortunately a breakdown in the relationship between the husband and wife. Um, and in a lot of cases, it ends up in divorce, resulting in quite a toxic issues between the husband and wife, which affects the children. Um, Firstly, as Muslims, we do know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has permitted divorce in cases where the relationship is has broken down so much that it's irreconcilable. So that's the first thing. But obviously, that should be the last resort. Now, what I think it's really important to highlight and for us to think about is looking at this issue from the mental health and well-being perspective. What I mean by that is that often I've been involved in cases where either the husband or the wife has carried over baggage from their own childhood, whether that's experiencing domestic violence, um, experiencing trauma, seeing unhealthy relationships when they were growing up, and this can shape. This does shape the individual in terms of their personality traits, their ability to cope with distress and um, tolerate um, normal everyday issues that come up, not be able to healthily regulate their emotions, etc. So there's a developmental perspective that we need to consider. So what I would highlight is that if you are in a relationship which is toxic, which is breaking down, is to try and understand your partner's upbringing and childhood and development from and how that's shaped their personality. So, for example, maybe a husband becomes abusive initially verbally and then physically towards his wife or children. And when you look into this individual's own experiences as a child, often they replay what they've experienced themselves. So they may have been subjected to abuse themselves from their father or their mother. And this is something that's ingrained into their psyche, and this is what they act out. So there's a real understanding that needs to be developed about the person's personality traits, personality vulnerabilities, their own psychological and personality profiles. And I think this really should be discussed before marriage, something that I've rarely seen anybody explore and research. So before marriage, we obviously look at physical health, but I think psychological and mental health should also be looked at, should also be discussed. There are, unfortunately, because of stigma, a lot of people do hide their own um, mental health issues or family issues or domestic violence, which can then kind of erupt in a very turbulent and toxic way later on, damaging their own marriages. So, as parents, as family members, when we are or as young people looking to get married, I think it's really important to explore the psychological profile of the potential partner, understand, to try and better understand and see whether you'll be compatible with them. So, for example, a lot of sisters, they may, usually females, develop emotionally unstable personality disorder, which what that basically means is that some people, because of their own childhood experiences, their environmental experiences, and maybe genetics also, find develop personality issues which can be classified as emotionally unstable. So this is characterized by breakdown in interpersonal relationships, impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, poor distress tolerance, all these kind of things. Then when you put this individual in a stressful marriage situation can cause serious issues. Um, Similarly, for example, the man, maybe he becomes abusive because he's unable to tolerate um, stuff at work, which then is played out in the home environment, subhanAllah. So um, I would recommend all of us to reflect on our own emotional intelligence and psychological profiles and talk to our children. So subhanAllah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given every individual slightly different temperament and strengths and weaknesses. So in our families, we should have these conversations, use this language of emotional intelligence, psychological profile, personality, strengths and weaknesses. So some people, they have issues with anger management, and you can detect that from a young age. So before they get married and take on the responsibility of being in a relationship with another person, it's something maybe that some people, individuals should be working on prior to marriage. And then obviously, once they are married, it needs to be carried on with the partner. Other people may have issues with dips in mood, so they may experience depressive episodes, during which time they isolate themselves. They don't maybe fulfill the needs of their husband or their wife. And that can cause serious problems if the other individual doesn't understand that what their partner is going through is actually a depressive episode or an anxiety episode, um, and that it's not in their control. And I think understanding these issues, uh, inshallah, will resolve a lot of the conflict that we see in terms of marital cases, which can, inshallah, prevent divorce. But it really begins by having these conversations, and this is my intention of doing this video today, is to highlight that this is something that we should be thinking about. So for those individuals, marriage counselors or imams who are looking at these kind of cases, I would advise and recommend that part of the discussions and discourse when things are being trying to resolve is to look at the psychological profiles of both individuals, their strengths and weaknesses, and how they can work on themselves to improve the relationship. The other important aspect of this also is the impact on children. So there's a lot of research, scientific evidence about developmental trauma and what kids witness and how that impacts on their own growth and development and also development of not abnormal, but weaknesses that may affect them in adult life. So it's for us to be very mindful that whatever we do within the family home, that our kids are learning from those behaviors. So to try and enjoy healthy behaviors. And subhanAllah, we look at the seerah, how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with his family, his wives, his children. Um, and that is our perfect example, inshallah, to try and follow. Um, it's part of life to have disagreements and conflict, but one of the ways to a successful and long-lasting marriage, inshallah, is to be able to resolve them in a nurturing and healthy environment and to prevent a toxic environment developing, which affects the mental health of both the parents and the children in the family home. Um, so inshallah, I'll try and maybe we'll do some podcasts where people can engage and interact and ask questions about this aspect. But this is something I feel is really neglected when we look at issues with marriage, issues in marriages, and preventing divorce and resolving conflict. Okay, inshallah. Until next time, this is your brother, Dr. Abu Isa. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وأستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.